Canada's Arctic islands. Beneath this polar shell of rock, sea, and ice lie abundant supplies of crude oil and natural gas. This storehouse of energy resources has only begun to be tapped and promises to make Canada energy self-sufficient for many years. The exploration of these Arctic island oil and gas resources began seriously in 1968, when Panarctic Oils Limited initiated exploration in the Arctic islands. As the sole operator in this vast territory above the Arctic Circle, Panarctic Oils Limited is a consortium of industry and government partners. The Canadian public, through Petro-Canada, owns more than 50% of Panarctic shares, with the balance held by 37 largely Canadian corporate and individual shareholders. Panarctic and the companies for which it operates have invested about $1 billion exploring the Arctic islands, and the results have been worth it. Panarctic has discovered more natural gas here than has been found in either the Beaufort or Canada's eastern offshore. Marketable natural gas reserves are estimated at more than 17 trillion cubic feet. Gas condensate products exceed 60 million barrels. And to date, up to 310 million barrels of recoverable crude oil reserves have been discovered. 10 significant natural gas discoveries have increased Canada's known gas reserves by 25%. In addition, Panarctic has found 6 promising crude oil fields capable of producing significant quantities of high-grade crude oil. Panarctic's exploration program, carried out in the world's most inhospitable climate, has produced radical innovations for the energy industry. The first ice island drilling platform. This artificially strengthened ice platform offered solutions to some of the problems of drilling offshore in the Arctic Ocean. And to complete an offshore gas well, Panarctic developed a method of subsea completion never before utilized. Special rigs were designed and built to fit in a Hercules aircraft. These could be transported quickly and efficiently to ice-strengthened airstrips, another Panarctic innovation. Panarctic's exploration base is Ray Point, located on Melville Island, some 1,800 miles north of Calgary. As the first petroleum exploration base in this region, it houses the equipment and supplies used to explore for oil and gas in the Arctic islands. These achievements have thrust Panarctic Oils to the forefront of modern exploration technology. The next step is to provide southern Canadian markets with a direct and regular supply of these resources. The key to assuring that vital supply is the ability to find, produce, and transport crude oil from the Arctic islands to Canadian refineries. This is the story of Panarctic's bold new venture and how it was achieved. In 1983, senior staff met to decide that a demonstration project was essential to develop and test a critical objective: shipping the first tanker load of crude oil from a producing well in the Arctic islands directly to Montreal. Panarctic's president, Charles Hetherington, crisply signaled their consensus.
Gentlemen, let's do it.
In 1976, Panarctic had completed a production oil well on land at Cameron Island, about 75 miles north of the Ray Point base camp. Named the Panarctic et al. West Bent Horn A02, it fit ideally the criteria required for a demonstration project. The well was land-based, capable of producing about 5,000 barrels of crude oil a day. The crude oil was very high quality, 42 degrees API gravity. And it sat just 2 miles from an ideal natural harbor, accessible to an ice-strengthened tanker. With the production and storage site selected, Panarctic turned to the next step, safely shipping the crude oil south. The transportation plan was born of logic and simplicity. Each August, the Ray Point Base Camp is resupplied with fuel by tanker. Why not send the ship back loaded with crude oil? The shipping route from Montreal to Ray Point and Cameron Island was well charted, and a Coast Guard icebreaker would provide escort. It was determined through historical data that the route might be closed by heavy ice 1 out of every 3 years. Even so, the delivery of Arctic crude would be viable and provide a small profit to Panarctic. Two factors were stressed above all: safety and efficiency. After all, no one had done this before. There were no manuals to follow. In early 1985, Panarctic staff began construction of the storage and process facilities at Bent Horn. Panarctic reopened a Herc strip on Cameron Island and built the necessary access roads. A quarry was established to supply aggregate for the project. The wellhead site was filled and leveled as construction began on the 2-mile, 4.5-inch elevated pipeline to the tank's site. The support pilings for the pipeline were set in holes, drilled in the permafrost, and then frozen into place. Panarctic delivered the tank steel to the Bent Horn site in the spring of 1985. The tank was of conventional design and easily transported by Hercules aircraft. To protect the permafrost from the warm oil in the tank, the company designed a special tank pad. A 40-inch layer of aggregate was laid. 5-inch pipe was strung across the pad surface. This was covered with more aggregate and a 4-inch insulation layer. A sheeting of plywood and another 12 inches of aggregate topped off the tank pad. If necessary, the 5-inch pipe could be manifolded and coolant then pumped through the system to carry away excess heat. As each stage of the construction was completed, sophisticated safety checks were performed to ensure the integrity of the components and to prevent the risk of damage to the environment. Rigid demands were required for the section welds of the storage tank. During construction, X-ray and ultrasonic non-destructive testing were performed to assure weld integrity. To further increase the environmental protection of the site, a large line berm was constructed to encircle the tank pad. It was designed to contain any accidental spillage of oil, up to 110% of tank volume. To stabilize the crude oil before storage, heater and separator units were installed. The heater skid will bring the temperature of the crude oil up to 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Then the oil flows to the separator, where produced gas is sent to flare. The crude oil is piped to the storage tank and can be reheated to maintain fluidity, even in the Arctic's sub-zero temperature. Finally, the loading line was constructed, which would gravity feed the crude oil stored in the tank to the beach. All systems were checked and rechecked before the storage tank was filled with the crude oil from the Bent Horn well. Working around the clock, the Panarctic crews had made the facility at Bent Horn ready, both on time and on budget. By August 1985, the stage was set for the most significant development in the history of Arctic Island's energy production. Panarctic has chartered the MV Arctic to ensure this historic cargo is transported safely through ice-infested waters. Canada's premier ice-strengthened tanker glides through the Northwest Passage, relatively ice-free at this time of year. The vessel's new tanks give her double-hulled protection for extra safety while carrying oil cargo. The Arctic's assignment is a strategic part of the overall transportation plan. After leaving the area of highest ice risk, she will transfer the 100,000-barrel shipment of crude oil to a tanker of lesser ice class the Imperial Bedford. She will complete the voyage to Montreal in 10 days. The Arctic's first task is to put into Ray Point to offload diesel fuel for the coming winter's operations. Portable navigation lights have been aligned to establish a range for final approach to shore. As the MV Arctic makes fast, a line is flown to the ship to begin the operation of pulling the flexible oil hose from the shore. The operation runs smoothly, carefully monitored to assess the procedure. Next, the hose is winched out to the tanker. As the MV Arctic offloads the diesel oil, Panarctic's Twin Otter aircraft take to the skies above Byam Martin Channel. The pilots are flying ice reconnaissance patrols. In this area, ice conditions can change within hours, and updated information is critical for the safest passage.
And can you give me a check on the ice conditions, please?
It looks like first year ice is about 1/10 coverage. Go ahead.
The offloading completed, the MV Arctic stands off Ray Point. The ship is ballasting down to its ice belt for navigation through ice. During the 16-hour operation, the Coast Guard icebreaker De Grossier stands by off Ray Point. That evening, the significance of the event becomes more apparent. Panarctic's President and Chief Executive Officer Charles Hetherington arrives at Ray Point. He will host representatives of the federal and territorial governments, senior government officials, and the national news media to witness this historic event. And Mr. Hetherington has arrived with an historic document just delivered from the federal government.
That says production license number 1, the first production license issued to anybody from Canada lands to produce oil from the Arctic.
Next, the VIP jet arrives from Vancouver. Energy Minister Pat Carney and government staff are greeted with a warm reception in the chilly Arctic evening. Even the camp dogs are impressed with the air of celebration at their isolated home on Melville Island. The final plane arrives with the government leader of the Northwest Territories, Richard Nirisu. They, along with the national news media, are here to see if Panarctic can live up to its promise to produce and deliver the first crude oil from the Arctic islands. Next morning, the ballasting operation complete, the crew of the MV Arctic prepares to head north to the Bent Horn camp on Cameron Island. At 6:30 a.m., the command is given to get underway. The ice master of the MV Arctic, Captain Dennis Schofield, makes a final check with the Ray Point Control Center.
Yes, present moment the conditions are pretty good. We've only about 3/10 ice cover, and ETA Bent Horn should be in about 18 hours over.
MV Arctic, Ray Point, roger, have a good trip.
As the Arctic makes way, the route conditions appear excellent. The ice radar is activated to give a clear picture of what she will encounter. Here in the Arctic islands, navigation is never left to chance. Stringent environmental and safety standards are followed every inch of the way. Back at Ray Point, the news reporters are anxious to get the story of Panarctic's history-making shipment. Charles Hetherington obliges with the news conference. Energy Minister Pat Carney tells reporters the federal government sees this project as a strengthening of Canada's sovereignty in the high Arctic. For nearly 20 years, Panarctic has explored the Arctic islands for oil and natural gas. It has developed a close cooperation with the government leader of the Northwest Territories. Richard Nirisu is pleased with the way Panarctic has taken his constituents' concerns and ideas into its development plans. As the news conference concludes, attention returns to the voyage of the MV Arctic en route to Cameron Island. The MV Arctic is making passage through the ice in the east end of Arnott Strait. The Coast Guard escort, steaming just ahead, opens a safe passageway. As another day begins, the ships arrive at their destination, the harbor off Bent Horn. Looking like Christmas ships, the De Grossier and the MV Arctic brighten the gloomy Arctic night. For the Panarctic staff, this moment is just like Christmas. As dawn breaks, the tanker moves to the loading berth marked with a buoy. She will remain at anchor until the loading is complete. The staff at the facility have no trouble getting started, although the outboard motor on this inflatable boat does. Finally, a line is taken out to the tanker to begin the loading operation. The loading line and hose are connected. The main valve is opened, and the first crude oil from the Arctic islands begins to flow into the tanks of the MV Arctic. During the next 18 hours, the tanker will load 100,000 barrels of high-grade Arctic crude. After loading, the crude oil in the hose is purged to shore by the ship's inerting system. It floats to the surface of the harbor like a giant sea serpent. A Caterpillar tractor takes the strain as the hose is pulled in. Fully loaded with her historic cargo, the MV Arctic prepares to head south again to rendezvous with the second tanker, the Imperial Bedford. This short 200-mile route will enable the MV Arctic to clear Ice Zone 1 by proceeding south through Byam Martin Channel and then northeast to Little Cornwallis Island. The Panarctic pilots keep a watchful eye as she steams toward the rendezvous point. The transfer of the crude oil to the Imperial Bedford proceeds without incident. However, a containment boom has been deployed as a precaution. Now, another chapter in the story of the first Arctic oil delivery is about to open. The Imperial Bedford will take the starring role with a 10-day trip to Montreal and the Petro-Canada refinery. The journey would take her east through the fabled Northwest Passage, then south through Baffin Bay, Davis Strait, the North Atlantic, and the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Although heavy seas are encountered in Davis Strait off the east coast of Baffin Island, the Imperial Bedford arrives on schedule. As she approaches the dock in Montreal Harbor, crews busily prepare for the final objective in the plan, delivering the oil to the Petro-Canada refinery. The greatness of this moment is signified with subtlety. The Panarctic flag flies proudly from the Imperial Bedford's mast, marking the arrival of the first oil shipment from Canada's Arctic islands. Prior to the final transfer, the crude oil is sampled and the pipeline connections are checked. The signal is given. Start the pumps. The operation had flowed as smoothly as the oil surging through these pipes to the refinery. Panarctic's employees had excelled through the most arduous effort to complete each phase on time and on budget. The first shipment of Arctic Island crude oil would soon be refined into retail products and distributed to Petro-Canada's eastern consumers. It was now time to celebrate the achievement. Petro-Canada and Panarctic officials, including Panarctic President Charles Hetherington and Project Manager Gray Alexander, took to the podium to announce their success. Under the glare of TV lights, reporters listened as Mr. Hetherington made this dramatic announcement.
We have just shipped the first commercial tanker load of crude oil out of Canada's Arctic.
The officials from Panarctic and Petro-Canada outlined the project which had produced another first for Canadians, the discovery of the Bent Horn oil field some 10 years prior, and the development of the first crude oil production, storage, and transportation system in the high Arctic islands. This was the first shipment of Arctic Island crude oil. Starting on this small scale, the lessons learned would be built upon to assure Canada of an energy supply, leading to a goal of energy self-sufficiency for many years to come. The skeptics were silenced. The plan worked. The people of Panarctic who made it work have not left the Arctic. With government encouragement, exploration will continue to reveal the precious crude oil locked beneath the ice and rock of the Arctic islands. The Bent Horn project provided a multitude of answers to complex questions about the feasibility of producing and shipping Arctic crude oil. The success of this project has demonstrated that government and industry can work together, developing our Arctic island resources for the benefit of all Canadians and the security of future domestic energy supplies. For now, Canadians can be encouraged that it can be done, and Panarctic will lead the way.